The Millionaire's surprising action after she caught her boyfriend in the act. Hey everyone, welcome back to Will I Be Happy? I'm your narrator, and I have a story that will leave you absolutely stunned. Imagine having everything you've ever worked for: a booming career, a luxurious lifestyle, and a partner who seems perfect in every way, only to discover a betrayal that shakes your world to its core. This tale is inspired by true events and delves deep into themes of trust, ambition, and unexpected revenge. If you're intrigued by stories that explore the complexities of relationships and the resilience of the human spirit, then you're in for a real treat. Before we get into this juicy tale, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to hear what you think about this incredible journey. Now, let's dive into the Millionaire's surprising course of action after she caught her boyfriend in the act. Nadia Sunrise didn't just walk into rooms, she owned them. The chandeliers above glittered like 1,000 diamonds as she stood in the center of the ballroom, effortlessly poised, champagne flute in hand. Manhattan's elite circled around her, laughing, flirting, and networking like it was an Olympic sport. Tonight, it was all about her latest success. T-Witness, her digital media empire, had just hit 100 million subscribers, and everyone wanted to be seen with her. Nadia had learned early that success wasn't handed to you, even if you were Richie Sunrise's daughter. Sure, growing up in a sprawling estate in Short Hills, New Jersey, meant she had never wanted for anything material. But while her friends played with ponies and partied in Ibiza, she'd spent her 20s building something of her own. No family money, no easy handouts. She'd turned T-Witness from a blog into a global brand with nothing but her wits and a few well-timed business moves. Now, at 35, she had it all: the high-rise penthouse, the designer clothes, and her name on Forbes lists. But what people didn't see, the part she never let them see, was the cost of it all. Every smile at these events, every handshake and air kiss came with a price, and tonight that price felt unusually heavy. "I give it 2 months before they try to poach you," Claudia Angelista said, sliding up beside Nadia with her signature martini. The CTO of T-Witness and Nadia's best friend, Claudia, had a sharp tongue and sharper wit, which made her the perfect companion for nights like these. Nadia and Claudia's friendship was the stuff of legends within their circle. They had met during their freshman year at Columbia University, both business majors in a sea of future moguls. Their rivalry in class was fierce. Both women were at the top of their game, constantly vying for the highest grades and most innovative projects. Their competitive banter eventually blossomed into mutual respect. A turning point came during a grueling group assignment when they were paired together. Working late nights in the library, fueled by coffee and ambition, they discovered how well their strengths complemented each other. Nadia was the strategic visionary, while Claudia was the tactical executor. After college, they took on the corporate world together. When Nadia decided to turn T-Witness from a mere concept into a reality, Claudia was the first person she called. As the chief technical officer, Claudia built the platform from the ground up, translating Nadia's vision into a tangible product. Their combined talents turned T-Witness into the powerhouse it was today. Outside of work, they were inseparable. Weekend brunches, spontaneous trips abroad, and countless hours spent discussing everything from business trends to personal dreams cemented their bond. Claudia was more than a friend. She was family, the sister Nadia never had. 2 months? That's generous. Nadia took a sip of her champagne, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm sure they're already drafting offers." Claudia laughed. "Please, darling, you've turned them all down before. They know you're not for sale." Not for sale. That was the truth. She had worked too hard to get here to be anyone's commodity. T-Witness was hers, built with 10 fingers, sleepless nights, and enough tenacity to put any man in the boardroom to shame. Let them come with their offers. She wouldn't budge. And besides, Claudia added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, you'd never leave this city. Where would we go for rooftop cocktails? Nadia smiled, clinking her glass with Claudia's. You have a point. But as the conversation lulled, her eyes drifted toward Dean Pardo. He was across the room, locked in conversation with a group of investors, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his suit tailored to perfection. He looked every bit the power player. Dean was the kind of man who moved through the world with an ease that was equal parts frustrating and alluring. He didn't have to try hard. He just was. Dean had been different, smooth, confident, the kind of man who didn't just take up space. He dominated it. He had been impossible to ignore, and she hadn't tried. For the first time in her career-focused life, she let herself fall. Hard. They had met at a charity art auction 5 years ago, an event neither of them particularly wanted to attend, but were obliged to for networking purposes. Nadia was examining a modern sculpture, contemplating its chaotic beauty, when Dean approached her. Stunning piece, isn't it? He remarked, his gaze fixed on the sculpture. She glanced over, prepared to offer a polite smile and move on. But something about his genuine interest caught her off guard. It is, she agreed, though it seems a bit conflicted, like it can't decide what it wants to be. Dean chuckled, much like most people in this room. She raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Including you? Especially me, he admitted, extending his hand. Dean Pardo. Nadia Sunrise. He tilted his head, recognition lighting up his eyes. Thea Nadia Sunrise, founder of T-Witness? She nodded modestly. Guilty. They spent the rest of the evening deep in conversation, oblivious to the crowd around them. Over the months that followed, their paths crossed frequently, at conferences, industry panels, and by intentional design. Dean was persistent, yet patient, slowly weaving himself into her life. He challenged her perspectives, celebrated her victories, and provided a solace she hadn't realized she needed. Nadia, who had always kept her personal life guarded, found herself opening up to him. They became confidants, partners in both business and life. Dean wasn't just a charming addition to her world, he became a foundational part of it. Now, 4 years later, they were Thea couple, New York's golden power duo. People watched them, whispered about them, and Dean knew exactly how to play that part. Just as charming in private as he was in public, though lately something had been off. A little too much distance, a few too many late nights. Claudia raised an eyebrow. You're doing that thing again. Claudia had always been protective of Nadia, especially when it came to matters of the heart. When Dean entered the picture, her guard was naturally up. She had seen too many people try to use Nadia for her connections and success. Unbeknownst to Nadia, Claudia and Dean shared a complicated history. They had first met at a tech summit in San Francisco years ago, before Nadia and Dean's relationship began. Their professional admiration had briefly slipped into something more personal. A fleeting affair fueled by ambition and mutual understanding. Things are heating up, aren't they? But before we dive deeper into the drama, head over to our channel for more thrilling stories. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss any videos. Claudia had ended it, recognizing that it was a mistake, especially as Dean grew closer to Nadia. However, unresolved feelings lingered beneath the surface. Back at the gala, Nadia snapped back to attention. What thing? She asked, staring at Dean like you're trying to solve a puzzle. Stop! You're giving off desperate housewife energy and we can't have that. Nadia laughed, shaking her head. Please, desperation isn't in my vocabulary. Good, because we both know men like Dean. They're too pretty to worry about. Let them chase us, not the other way around. Speaking of which, is that Richie over there? With Bunny? Claudia nodded toward the far side of the room where Richie Sunrise, Nadia's father, held court with his latest girlfriend. Bunny Staton, tall, platinum blonde, and about 2 decades too young for him, was draped over his arm like a designer bag. "Unfortunately," Nadia muttered. Richie had never been subtle about his romantic choices, and Bunny was just the latest in a long line of women who weren't much older than Nadia. "I still don't understand what they talk about. What could they possibly have in common?" "Probably nothing that requires talking," Claudia quipped, her tone dry. Nadia rolled her eyes, watching as Bunny let out a high-pitched giggle at something Richie had said. It must be nice, she thought, living that carefree trophy wife life. But Nadia could never relate. She had spent her life trying to prove she was more than just Richie Sunrise's spoiled daughter. She was a millionaire in her own right, not just because of her last name. What Nadia didn't see were the undercurrents swirling beneath the surface. Dean, while ambitious, struggled with the reality of being overshadowed by Nadia's success. His own ventures, though moderately successful, never reached the heights of T-Witness. Being known primarily as Nadia Sunrise's boyfriend gnawed at his pride. Claudia, on the other hand, grappled with feelings of invisibility. Despite her critical role in T-Witness, she was often relegated to the background. Interviews, magazine features, and industry accolades typically spotlighted Nadia alone. Claudia began to wonder if she would ever step out of her friend's shadow. Their shared insecurities created an unexpected connection. During late nights at the office, when Nadia was away on business, Dean and Claudia found themselves confiding in each other. They discussed their frustrations, their desires for recognition, and the loneliness that came with their positions. One evening, after too many drinks celebrating a project milestone without Nadia, lines blurred. A shared glance turned into a fleeting touch, which escalated into a moment they both would later regret. It was a betrayal born not out of love or lust, but from a place of vulnerability and misplaced solace. In the aftermath, guilt consumed them both. They agreed it was a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. But the damage was done, and the secrecy forged a bond that neither fully understood but couldn't easily break. Richie caught Nadia's eye across the room and raised his glass in a casual acknowledgement. She responded with a tight smile, turning her attention back to Claudia. "Sometimes I wonder if he's doing it on purpose," she said, "bringing Bunny to every event just to get under my skin." Claudia shrugged. "You know Richie. He's got 2 great loves, real estate and blondes. At least one of them makes him moany." Speaking of which, Claudia glanced over at Dean, still deep in conversation with investors. "What's he up to tonight? Business or pleasure?" Nadia's smile tightened. "You tell me. He's been glued to that group all night." Claudia leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You trust him, don't you?" "Of course I do," Nadia said, a little too quickly. But even as she said it, something in her chest tightened. Claudia was her best friend, but that didn't mean Nadia could admit her doubts. Not here, not tonight. She had spent years cultivating an image of control, of always being one step ahead. If there was one thing she couldn't afford, it was letting anyone see cracks in that facade. "Don't worry," Claudia said, sensing the tension. "Dean loves being the center of attention, but at the end of the day, he's yours. All of this," she gestured around the room, "it's his playground, but you're the queen." Nadia smiled, but the words rang hollow. Maybe Claudia was right. Maybe Dean was just playing the role expected of him. Or maybe... She pushed the thought aside. Tonight wasn't the night to question things. "Let's get another drink," Nadia said, steering the conversation away from Dean. "I'm going to need something stronger if I have to make small talk with Richie and Bunny later." "Now you're talking," Claudia grinned, linking her arm through Nadia's. "Let's find something worth drinking." As they walked across the room, Nadia couldn't help but glance back at Dean one last time. He was laughing with the investors, his back to her, completely at ease. Claudia noticed Nadia's distant gaze toward Dean. You're doing that thing again, she teased gently. What thing? Nadia asked, snapping back to attention. Overanalyzing, worrying about Dean, Claudia replied, her eyes flickering toward him. Nadia sighed. I just feel like we're not on the same page lately. Claudia offered a reassuring smile. You know how men like Dean are. Always chasing the next deal. Don't let it get to you. Nadia nodded, but the feeling lingered. Sometimes I wonder if I truly know him. Claudia hesitated for a moment before replying. Have you talked to him about how you feel? I've tried, but he avoids the conversation, Nadia admitted. Claudia placed a hand on her arm. Give it time, he'll come around. Nadia slammed the front door behind her, the click of the lock echoing in the spacious penthouse. The tension from the gala had followed her home, tightening around her like a vice. It wasn't just the whispers of admiration, the congratulations, or the glowing spotlight of success that had made her feel off balance. It was Dean. Again. He had spent the evening as he always did, schmoozing investors, flashing that devastating smile, working the room like it was his own personal playground. And yet, when it came to them, their future, he remained as slippery as ever. Are you going to keep pretending there's nothing wrong? She called out, her voice sharper than she intended. Dean appeared from the hallway, loosening his tie with a casual shrug. What are you talking about now? What am I talking about? Nadia repeated, incredulous. How can you stand there like this isn't a problem? 4 years, Dean. We've been together for 4 years, and every time I bring up the future, you act like I'm asking you to walk across hot coals. Dean sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as though the conversation itself was physically draining him. We're doing fine, Nadia. We're happy. Why do you keep pushing this? Happy? She laughed, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. What does that even mean anymore? We live together. We run a business together. And yet, whenever I mention marriage, you shut down, like it's the last thing you want. Dean's eyes narrowed slightly, his usual charm slipping away. Maybe because it is the last thing I want. Right now, at least. Nadia's heart tightened, though she tried not to show it. Right now, she repeated softly. And when exactly does that change? A year, 5 years, when I'm 40? You're overthinking this, Dean said, stepping toward her, his tone shifting into the kind of calm, rational explanation that always made her feel like she was the problem. We're good, Nadia. We've got everything. This place, our careers, each other. Why does a piece of paper matter? It's not about a piece of paper, and you know it. Nadia set her champagne glass down with a clink, taking a deep breath before continuing. It's about building a life together. It's about a future that isn't just this. She gestured vaguely around the penthouse. I've built my career, Dean, but I want more. I want a family, a future that isn't always on hold while you figure out if you're ready. Dean's face remained unreadable, his arms crossing over his chest in a way that made him seem impenetrable. You've always been so driven, Nadia. That's what I love about you. But not everything has to be part of some grand plan. She felt a flash of anger. This was his move, wasn't it? He knew she was the planner, the one who built empires while he coasted on his natural charisma. And maybe that had been enough for a while. Maybe the high of being the city's power couple had kept her from seeing what was right in front of her. But not anymore. You always do this, she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. You avoid the real conversation by making me feel like I'm pushing too hard, expecting too much. But I'm not. I'm asking for what anyone would expect after 4 years. What are we even doing if we don't have a future together? Dean dropped his hands to his sides, finally looking at her directly. We're building something, Nadia. You don't see that? No, she said bluntly. Not when you won't even talk about what that something is. I need more than vague promises, Dean. I need to know we're moving towards something real. And right now, I don't even know if you're in this for the long haul. Dean stared at her, silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head, his expression tight. "I can't do this right now." And just like that, he turned, walking out of the room and leaving her standing alone in the penthouse they shared, but at this moment felt emptier than it ever had. The next day, Nadia escaped to the one place that always helped her clear her head, her father's estate in Short Hills. The sprawling grounds were a sanctuary from the chaos of the city, though the memories they held were far from peaceful. As soon as she stepped inside, Dorian, her younger brother, was lounging in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. "Nad, finally," Dorian said, flashing her a smile as she dropped her bag by the door. "You look like you need a drink." "I need more than a drink," she muttered, heading straight for the fridge and grabbing a bottle of sparkling water. Dorian raised an eyebrow, sitting up in his chair. "What's going on? You and Dean?" Nadia didn't answer right away. She wasn't ready to say the words out loud. Not yet. Instead, she slid into the chair across from him, running a hand through her hair. "Just life." "Right," Dorian said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Life's tough when you're a millionaire running a media empire. I'm sure it's really stressful." She shot him a look. "You have no idea." Dorian shrugged, leaning back. "Come on, it can't be that bad. You've got the dream life, the penthouse, the company. Dean, what's the problem?" "Dean is the problem," Nadia said quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "We had another fight last night, about the future." Dorian's playful expression shifted to something more serious. "What did he say?" Nadia took a deep breath, debating how much to reveal. "He said he doesn't want to get married. Not right now. Maybe not ever." "Wow," Dorian whistled, leaning forward. "That's kind of a big deal, Nad." "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep waiting for him to change his mind. What if he never does?" "Then what are you going to do?" Dorian asked, his tone more serious than she was used to. "I mean, you've put up with a lot, but if he's not willing to meet you halfway, maybe it's time to figure out what you want." Nadia glanced at her brother, the weight of his words sinking in. For all his irresponsibility, Dorian had a way of cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of things. She loved him for it, even if she didn't always take his advice. But this time, he was right. "I don't know," she admitted, feeling more lost than she had in years. "I really don't." Before Dorian could respond, the front door opened, and Richie's voice boomed through the house. "Where's my favorite daughter?" "In the kitchen," Dorian called out, shooting Nadia a grin. "Ready for some classic Richie pep talk?" Nadia smiled despite herself. Their father, for all his faults, had a way of making everything seem less daunting, even if his advice often came in the form of real estate metaphors. Richie walked in, dressed in his usual sharp casual attire. Linen shirt, khaki pants, looking far too relaxed for someone who was juggling billion-dollar properties and a girlfriend half his age. Bunny Staton was nowhere to be seen, which was a relief. Nadia could only handle so much of her father's vapid girlfriend at a time. "There's my girl," Richie said, pulling her into a hug. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Nadia leaned into the hug, grateful for the moment of comfort. "I'm fine, Dad." "You don't look fine," Richie said, stepping back to get a better look at her. "Something on your mind?" "It's just work," she lied, not ready to dive into the mess that was her relationship. Richie had never been great at giving advice when it came to matters of the heart, his own romantic life being a prime example. "Well, don't let it get to you. Business is business, but life's too short to let it eat you up. You're doing great. Just look at what you've built." Nadia nodded, though the words rang hollow. "Look at what I've built." It was what she always did. Build. Build her career, build her reputation, build her life. But when it came to Dean, she wasn't sure what they were building anymore. If anything. Richie gave her a wink. "Now come on, let's have dinner. You need to take your mind off work." As they moved to the dining room, Dorian shot her a quick look. "We'll talk more later," he said quietly. "You know where to find me." Nadia nodded, but the truth was, she wasn't sure talking would help. Not this time, because no matter what anyone said, the decision about her future, about Dean, was one she would have to make on her own. Nadia stepped off the elevator, the key to their penthouse cold in her hand. Her heart beat faster than it should have. She hadn't warned Dean she was coming home early. Maybe she hadn't wanted to. The text he sent earlier that night, "Late meeting again, don't wait up," was still sitting unread on her phone. She'd been hearing it for weeks. Every time he worked late, every time he came home hours after she'd fallen asleep, his excuses felt heavier, emptier. And after the argument about marriage, Dean had grown more distant, slipping out of conversations as smoothly as he slipped out of her life. Nadia stepped inside, the stillness of the apartment immediately unsettling. She set her purse down softly on the marble console, listening for any signs of Dean. The apartment was dark, save for the faint glow coming from the bedroom. That's when she heard it. Low voices, soft, familiar, but wrong. Her breath hitched, and she moved toward the door, her heels silent on the floor. Something was pulling her toward the noise, a feeling she couldn't shake, one that had been building for weeks. The air felt thick around her as she reached the bedroom door. It was open. She stepped in, her eyes locking on the bed. Dean and Naomi. Her assistant was on top of him, her long hair cascading down over her shoulders, her laughter low and intimate, the sheets tangled around them, the soft light casting shadows on their bodies as they moved together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nadia stood there, frozen. A storm of disbelief, rage, and heartbreak swirled within her, each emotion battling for dominance. Her mind screamed to confront them, but her body refused to move. She felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet, plunging her into a void of betrayal. They didn't see her, didn't hear her. Dean's hands gripped Naomi's waist, his eyes closed, his face full of something Nadia hadn't seen in weeks. Naomi's laugh pierced the room again as she leaned in, kissing him with a familiarity that made Nadia's stomach turn. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned, ongoing, calculated. Nadia felt something snap inside her. Her legs moved before her brain caught up, backing away from the door. Her hands trembling at her sides, she closed the door behind her, quietly enough that they wouldn't notice, and stumbled back down the hallway, her chest tightening with every step. In all the years she had known Dean, through every fight and every challenge, she had never felt this. Betrayal, humiliation. The world she had built with him was unraveling, collapsing under the weight of the truth she'd just seen. But Nadia didn't cry. She didn't scream. She would not let them see her break. Naomi had been more than just an assistant to Nadia. She had been a confidant, a gatekeeper, and at times, even a friend. She managed Nadia's hectic schedule with precision, anticipated her needs before they were voiced, and was privy to the inner workings of both Nadia's professional and personal life. Despite her pivotal role, Naomi often felt invisible, overshadowed by Nadia's brilliance and success. When Dean began to pay her attention, lingering glances, casual touches, whispered compliments, it stirred something deep within her. Dean's charm was intoxicating, and the allure of being truly seen was irresistible. Naomi allowed herself to believe that perhaps Dean could fall in love with her, that she could step out from Nadia's shadow. She ignored the moral lines she was crossing, seduced by the illusion of significance that Dean offered without fearing the consequences. The sunlight poured through the penthouse windows, harsh and glaring, as if the city itself had no sympathy for what had happened the night before. Nadia had spent the night in the guest room, her mind racing with every possibility, every question, but none of them mattered now. She had her answer. As she walked into the kitchen, she found Dean standing by the counter, drinking coffee as if nothing had changed. He looked up at her, casual, unaware. "Morning. Didn't hear you come to bed last night." Nadia stared at him, her hands cold at her sides. He hadn't even noticed. He didn't know she had spent the night in the guest room, or worse, that she had seen everything. She had been gone, and he had been so wrapped up in his lies, in Naomi, that he hadn't even cared. "I didn't," she said, her voice level. She turned away from him, opening the fridge and pulling out a bottle of water. "I couldn't sleep." Dean stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "You okay? You've seemed off lately." Nadia let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head at the absurdity of his question. Off. She hadn't been the one sneaking around. She hadn't been the one betraying the person she was supposed to build a future with. "I'm fine," she said, her tone sharper now. Dean's expression shifted. He could sense something wasn't right, but he couldn't piece it together. He didn't know yet. He hadn't figured out that everything was about to change. "We should talk," Dean said, his voice taking on the serious tone he used in business meetings. "I know we've been out of sync. I've been busy. You've had a lot going on, and I think it's gotten in the way of—" "Don't," Nadia interrupted, turning to face him. "Just don't." Dean blinked, thrown off by her response. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't act like this is something we can fix with a conversation," Nadia said, her voice cool but firm. "We're beyond that." He stared at her, confused. He didn't know. He still didn't know. Before he could respond, the front door buzzed. Dorian stepped in moments later, carrying 2 coffees and immediately sensing the tension in the room. His eyes flicked between Nadia and Dean, a question lingering on his face, but he didn't ask it yet. "Dean," Dorian greeted flatly, handing Nadia a coffee. "You heading out?" Dean grabbed his jacket from the chair, clearly eager to escape the growing unease. "Yeah, I've got a meeting." Nadia didn't look at him as he left. She couldn't. She couldn't face the man who had betrayed her so completely, not yet, not without her plan in place. When the door finally clicked shut, Dorian turned to her, his voice low. "Did you tell him?" Nadia shook her head, her hands tightening around the coffee cup. "No." Dorian let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "You need to. He has to know you're not going to let this slide." She exhaled, the weight of the betrayal still pressing against her chest. "He'll know," she said quietly, her voice sharpening with resolve. But not yet. Her mind was already racing with possibilities, with the steps she needed to take next. This wasn't just a betrayal she could walk away from. This was the beginning of something bigger, something she would control, not Dean. "I'm not going to let him get away with this," Nadia said, her voice colder now, steelier. "I'm going to make him regret every second of it." Dorian nodded, his expression serious. "Good. You deserve better than this." Nadia's jaw tightened, her mind already calculating. Dean had made the mistake of underestimating her, thinking he could live 2 lives without consequence. He and Naomi thought they had outsmarted her, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. The game has just begun. Nadia hadn't slept. The image of Dean and Naomi, her assistant, the woman she had trusted for years, was burned into her mind. But beneath the devastation, something else was simmering. Resolve. She wouldn't let this destroy her, not after everything she had built. The next morning, she sat at her desk, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, the city bustling below her. She could hear Naomi moving around outside, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Nadia had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't rage. She would strip Naomi of everything with the same precision Naomi had used to dismantle her trust. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. "Come in." Naomi entered, her usual professional demeanor in place, holding a tablet and a stack of reports. It was almost laughable. Was she really going to pretend everything was normal? The same woman who had been in bed with Dean last night was now here, acting as if she hadn't destroyed everything. "Nadia, I have the files you asked for," Naomi began, her voice chipper, as if the night before had never happened. "Shut the door," Nadia said, her voice ice cold. Naomi blinked, her smile fading. The shift in tone was impossible to ignore. Slowly, she closed the door, turning back toward Nadia with a look of mild confusion. But Nadia could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Is everything okay?" Naomi asked, her voice uncertain now. Nadia didn't respond immediately. She watched Naomi for a moment, taking in the face of the woman who had smiled at her for years, who had been by her side for every major business decision, every personal success, and now every personal failure. "We're done," Nadia said, her voice cold but controlled. "You're no longer employed at T-Witness." Naomi froze, her face paling. "What? Nadia, You don't need to say a word." Nadia cut her off, her eyes narrowing. "You know exactly why. Do you think I'm stupid? You think I wouldn't find out?" The color drained from Naomi's face completely. "Nadia, please, just let me explain." No explanations. There is no justification for what you did. You didn't just betray me professionally. You betrayed me personally, in my own home, with the man I thought I could trust." Naomi's lip quivered, but she said nothing. What could she say? Nadia rose from her chair, walking toward her slowly. "I gave you everything, Naomi. I trusted you with my life. I brought you into my world, and you took that trust and spit on it. You thought you could take everything from me. My company, my life, my future. And now you want to explain. What could you possibly say that would make this better?" Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, but Nadia felt no sympathy. This wasn't some accident. This was a calculated betrayal. "I made a mistake," Naomi whispered, her voice trembling. It just happened. I never meant for it to go this far." Nadia's anger flared, but her voice remained even. "Mistakes are accidental, Naomi. Sleeping with Dean wasn't a mistake. It was a choice you made over and over again, knowing exactly what it would cost me." Naomi took a step forward, desperation in her eyes. I was confused. He came on to me." "No," Nadia said, her voice sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "Don't you dare blame him for this. You were just as much a part of it as he was." Naomi flinched, but Nadia pressed on. "You thought you could have it all. My trust, my success, my life, and him. But you won't walk away with anything. Not a job, not your reputation, not a shred of my respect." Naomi's voice broke, her tears finally spilling over. "Please, Nadia, I need this job. You needed to think about that before you slept with my partner," Nadia snapped, her composure cracking just slightly as her anger boiled over. "You're done. Get out of my life, out of this building, and don't you ever show your face around me again." Naomi took a shaky breath, her eyes wide with panic. "Nadia, please. Enough!" Nadia's voice was deadly. "I've spent too many years giving everything to this city, building my life and my empire, and your actions won't dictate my path. You thought you could use me, manipulate me, steal from me. But you'll learn, Naomi. You'll learn that I don't lose." Naomi looked stunned, the weight of Nadia's words sinking in. She had underestimated the woman she had betrayed, and now she was paying the price. "Leave," Nadia said quietly, the finality in her voice chilling. "And don't come back. You don't survive me." Naomi hesitated for a second longer, as if she might say something else, but then she turned and walked out, her shoulders slumped, her steps heavy. As the door clicked shut behind her, Nadia stood still, her heart racing. The room was quiet now, but the storm inside her hadn't settled. This was only the beginning. The private dining room in one of Richie Sunrise's favorite clubs was a stark contrast to the chaos in Nadia's life. Dark wood, leather chairs, and soft music filled the space, creating an air of luxury and control. Everything was perfectly in place, just like Richie himself. Richie sat across from Nadia, swirling his whiskey in his hand, his sharp blue eyes fixed on her. He could see something had shifted in his daughter, something hard and unyielding. "What's going on, sweetheart?" Richie asked, taking a sip of his drink. "You've got that look in your eye." Nadia didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need your help." Richie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That's a first. You've never asked for help before. What happened?" Nadia took a deep breath, her hands folded in her lap. "Dean and Naomi." Richie's expression darkened. "What about them?" She laid it out for him, what she had seen, what she had discovered. When she finished, Richie sat back, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "I always knew that boy wasn't good enough for you," Richie muttered, shaking his head. "And Naomi? That's low, even for someone in this city." "I've already dealt with her," Nadia said, her voice calm but determined. "She's gone. But Dean? I want to destroy him." Richie's smile widened. "Now you're talking." Nadia leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "I've worked too hard to be enslaved by anyone's betrayal. Not by Dean, not by anyone. I want to make sure no one ever thinks they can control me again. I'm going to take back everything I gave him." Richie chuckled, lifting his glass in a mock toast. "You've got that killer instinct, sweetheart. It's about time you showed it." Nadia felt a slight weight lift from her shoulders. With her father's backing, she could do more than just take Dean down. She could strip him of everything. Dean had made a grave mistake, and now he would pay the price. She knew he wasn't brave enough to face her directly. He would send someone first. A buffer. Right on cue. Her phone buzzed with a text from Omar Yosef, Dean's best friend and her occasional tennis partner. "Can we talk? It's important." Omar swept into the office with his trademark self-assured charm, but a subtle tension betrayed him. He settled into the chair opposite Nadia, his posture unnaturally stiff, the usual slick bravado now a faltering facade. "You look like you're about to do something drastic," Omar ventured, a faint smile tugging at his lips, but his eyes darted nervously around the room. Nadia remained silent, her cool gaze piercing him, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. He was here to do Dean's dirty work, but she had no intention of making it easy. "Dean knows," Omar continued, his voice losing its edge. "He knows you found out. He's scared, Nadia. He doesn't know what to do." "Good," she said flatly. Omar sighed deeply, leaning forward. "He knows he messed up, but not all of this was his idea. You understand that, don't you?" Nadia raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Omar hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There are others involved. Advisors, people close to you." He cast her a sidelong glance, unable to meet her eyes. "You'll figure it out, Nadia. You're smart. Just know Dean didn't make these decisions alone." As he spoke, a pang of unease twisted in Omar's gut. He hadn't meant to reveal so much, but the steely determination in Nadia's eyes pushed him further than intended. Part of him hoped that by hinting at a wider betrayal, he might help Dean weather the impending storm. Perhaps if Nadia knew Dean wasn't the sole architect of this mess, she'd find a fragment of sympathy. But another part of him knew that dragging Claudia into this would only deepen the wound. He sighed inwardly, realizing his attempt at mediation might be fanning the flames. Nadia's heart clenched. Someone close to her? The nagging unease she'd felt around Claudia lately surged to the forefront. Could Claudia be involved? She masked her turmoil behind a composed facade, unwilling to betray her suspicions to Omar. If Claudia had betrayed her too, the knife would twist even deeper. "Who are you talking about?" she pressed, her voice steady but edged with tension. He offered a slight shrug. "I've said enough." Her mind raced, frantically connecting the dots. Claudia and Dean had been spending more time together lately. Business meetings, late nights at the office when she was away. She had brushed it off as work-related, but now... "Is that all?" she asked curtly. Omar nodded slowly. "Just be careful, Nadia. Sometimes the ones closest to us inflict the deepest wounds. She gave him a cold smile. Thanks for the warning. He stood up, hesitating as if he wanted to say more, but then thought better of it. Take care, Nadia. As the door clicked shut behind him, Nadia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. A storm of anger and betrayal swirled within her. If Claudia was involved, this was more than a personal betrayal. It was a dagger plunged by the hand she trusted most. Her fists clenched, nails biting into her palms. She needed to uncover the truth, and she would, no matter the cost. The penthouse was dark when Dean arrived, the only light coming from the dim city skyline outside. Nadia stood near the window, her silhouette sharp against the glass. She didn't turn when he entered, but she didn't have to. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, everything she had seen, everything he'd ruined. Dean lingered near the door, unsure of what to say, how to begin. Finally, he spoke, his voice hesitant. Nadia. She didn't move, her voice cold. Sit down. The command was clear, leaving no room for negotiation. Dean moved slowly to the couch, his legs heavy, like each step dragged him deeper into the abyss he had created. He sat down, hands clasped together, his mind racing. But every word he'd planned to say evaporated in the weight of her silence. Nadia's breath was calm, controlled, but her rage simmered beneath the surface, barely held in check. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked, her voice low and measured. She finally turned to face him, her eyes narrowing in the dark. "It's not that you cheated on me, it's that you made me believe you were better than this." Dean's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say to that? "You didn't just lie to me, Dean. You made me a fool." She stepped closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "Naomi, in our bed. And you thought I wouldn't find out? You thought I'd just keep playing house, smiling for the cameras while you stabbed me in the back." "Nadia, I didn't—" Dean's voice cracked. "It wasn't like that." "Oh, really?" Her laugh was bitter, cutting through him like a blade. "Then how was it? You didn't just wake up one day and fall into bed with my assistant. You chose this, over and over again." Dean's head dropped, guilt and shame twisting inside him. "I messed up. I know I did, but it wasn't about her. It was never about her." "Then what was it about?" Nadia demanded, her fury bubbling over. "What was it, Dean? Were you bored? Did screwing my assistant make you feel powerful? Or was it just convenient? Was it easier to betray me because she was already in the next room?" Dean flinched. "It wasn't about power. It wasn't—" He shook his head, his voice small, pathetic. "I don't know why I did it." "You don't know." Nadia's voice rose, disbelief and anger cutting through her words. "You don't know why you tore my life apart? You don't know why you lied to me every single day." Dean's hands tightened into fists. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to hurt me?" Nadia's voice cracked with fury. "You destroyed us, Dean. You destroyed me. And for what? You threw everything we had away for a fling with a woman who only knows how to follow orders." "I never stopped loving you," Dean whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes were wet now, desperation creeping into his tone. "I didn't stop loving you, Nadia. I don't even know why." "No," she cut him off, her voice ice cold. "You don't get to use that word. Love? You don't even know what that means. You didn't love me, Dean. If you did, you wouldn't have lied. You wouldn't have taken what we had and pissed all over it." Dean's hands trembled, his entire body trembling under the weight of her words. He tried to speak again, but every argument he thought he could make fell apart in the face of her cold fury. "I never wanted to lose you," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I was scared." "Scared?" Nadia's eyes flashed. "You weren't scared. You were selfish. You didn't care about losing me. You cared about getting caught." Dean's jaw clenched. He stood abruptly, moving toward her, his voice filled with desperation. "No, I cared about you. I still care about you." Nadia stepped back, her eyes burning with disgust. "Don't touch me!" Dean's hand froze in midair. The space between them filled with everything they weren't saying. He dropped his arm. Defeated, his face crumbling as the reality of what he had done settled in. "I didn't know how to fix things." Nadia laughed bitterly. "Fix? There's nothing left to fix, Dean. You didn't just cheat. You destroyed us. You took every moment we had, every bit of trust I gave you. And you tore it apart for what? For some cheap thrill? Because it was easier than being honest." His breath came faster, his chest heaving with panic. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just lost. We were drifting apart and I was scared. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore." "Talk to me?" Her voice was venomous. "You didn't know how to talk to me? Dean, I would have listened. I would have fought for us. But instead, you took the coward's way out." Dean fell back onto the couch, his head in his hands, his voice muffled. "I know, I'm a coward. I know." Nadia stood still, her eyes cold as she stared down at him, watching the man she once loved crumble. He had built his life on charm, on being the man everyone admired, but now, stripped of that, he was nothing. Just a man who had destroyed everything that mattered. "You had it all," she whispered, her voice laced with regret and fury. "You had me, and you ruined it." Dean looked up, his eyes pleading. "Please, Nadia, I can change. I can fix this." But Nadia didn't flinch. "You're already gone, Dean. You've been gone for a long time." Dean's chest heaved, his face contorted with grief. "I love you." Nadia's lips tightened into a thin line. She shook her head, her voice soft but unyielding. "No, you don't. You love yourself. You love the idea of us. But you don't love me." Tears brimmed in Dean's eyes as the last of his resolve broke. He reached for her, but Nadia stepped back again, her eyes locking with his. "Get out," she said, her voice steady, firm. He hesitated, his body frozen. "Nad, please, get out!" Her voice cut through the air like a whip, and this time there was no mistaking the finality in it. Dean stood, his body shaking, his mind reeling, but he obeyed. He walked to the door, stopping for just a moment, hoping she might say something, anything, that would give him a chance. But when he looked back, Nadia's face was hard, her arms crossed, and there was no trace of the woman who had once loved him. The door clicked shut behind him. Nadia stood still, her heart racing, her chest tight. She exhaled slowly, letting the silence of the room envelop her. The man who had once been everything to her was gone, and now all that was left was the cold, empty aftermath of his betrayal. There's much more ahead. Nadia's jaw clenched, her mind sharpening with a new resolve. Dean might be gone, but she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Nadia sat at her penthouse kitchen table, the skyline twinkling outside, but her mind was far from the shimmering lights. The betrayal she had uncovered about Dean and Naomi had left a heavy weight in her chest. But now, after piecing together subtle hints and inconsistencies, something else gnawed at her. She needed clarity, and she hoped Claudia, her closest friend, could provide it. When Claudia entered the penthouse, her usually calm, collected demeanor was intact, but Nadia, whose instincts were always razor-sharp, noticed a slight hesitation in the way Claudia closed the door behind her. Claudia settled into the chair across from Nadia, her lips forming a concerned frown. "You haven't been yourself lately, Nad. I'm worried." "I want to be alone, Claudia. There are things a person has to figure out on their own, and even a best friend can't help. I'll talk to you later when I have a clear head," Nadia told her bluntly. Claudia turned to leave, not before giving her friend a compassionate, confused, and apprehensive look. Nadia sat in silence after Claudia left, staring at her phone as it buzzed yet again. Another message from Dean. He had been texting her constantly since the night she confronted him, and she had ignored every single one. But now, the sheer volume of his apologies was grating on her nerves. She picked up the phone and scrolled through the latest messages. Dean, Friday, 8:05 a.m. Nad, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't stop thinking about you. Please, let me explain. Dean, Friday, 12:50 p.m. It was a mistake. You know I never meant to hurt you. We can fix this. I love you. Dean, Friday, 1:20 p.m. I'm sorry, you have to believe me. I miss you and I hate myself for what I did. Nadia clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the phone. Sorry? He had no idea what sorry even meant. His words rang hollow now, filling her with a sense of disgust. The more he texted, the more his attempts to manipulate her became obvious. She threw the phone back onto the table, resisting the urge to scream. How could he be so selfish, thinking he could just send a few texts and make everything right? Her phone buzzed again, and she didn't even bother to check. The texts were nothing more than noise now. A weak, pathetic attempt to fix something that couldn't be repaired. Later that day, Nadia found herself at the Sunrise Estate. It was a place that once felt safe, but now, standing in the sunroom of the grand mansion, she felt the weight of everything she had been trying to hold together. Bunny was sprawled across a couch, flipping through a magazine, her bleached blonde hair catching the sunlight. She looked up at Nadia with a bright but slightly confused smile. Hey Nadia, you look so serious. Dorian sat nearby, scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention. As they sat in the sunroom, Bunny casually mentioned, It's such a mess with Dean and Naomi, and now with Claudia involved. Nadia's heart pounded. What about Claudia? She asked, trying to keep her voice even. Bunny looked startled. Oh, I thought you knew. Dorian sighed, placing a protective hand on Nadia's shoulder. We overheard that Claudia and Dean were involved. It might have happened before you and Dean got serious, but there's talk that it continued. A cold chill ran down Nadia's spine. Omar's cryptic warnings now made horrifying sense. Are you telling me Claudia had an affair with Dean? Dorian nodded solemnly. I guess so. I'm sorry, Nadia. Nadia's mind reeled. The suspicions that had been forming since her conversation with Omar were now confirmed. Claudia had hidden the truth, played the loyal confidant, all while keeping this secret buried. Just then, Richie's voice cut through the room like a knife. What the hell did I just hear? Nadia turned, seeing her father standing in the doorway, his face dark with anger. He had overheard everything. Richie's eyes narrowed, and his voice was low, dangerous. Dean and Claudia, is this true, Nadia? She swallowed hard, her mind reeling. I didn't know. Richie's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. You're going to deal with this. No one does this to a Sunrise. Nadia felt the full weight of her father's words. She had lost so much already, but now, with Claudia's betrayal exposed, everything was falling apart. But she wasn't going to let this break her. Not yet. The next morning, Nadia summoned Claudia to her penthouse, the weight of betrayal heavy in the air. Claudia entered cautiously. Nad, what's up, babe? You wanted to see me. Here? Nadia's gaze was icy. Claude, I need you to be honest with me. Is there something you need to tell me about you and Dean? Claudia's face paled. She hesitated before admitting, Nadia, it was a mistake. It happened before you two were together, and I regretted it immediately. That's not all, is it? Nadia pressed, her voice steely. Claudia swallowed hard. A few months ago, we reconnected. It was only once. I was feeling overlooked, and he understood what I was going through. But it meant nothing, I swear. Pain flashed across Nadia's face. You were my best friend. How could you betray me like this? Tears welled in Claudia's eyes. I never wanted to hurt you. I was insecure and I made a terrible mistake. Nadia stood firm. Our friendship was built on trust, and you've shattered it. Please, let me make it right, Claudia pleaded. I'll do anything. Nadia shook her head. You can't undo this. Effective immediately, you're no longer part of T-Witness. Claudia's eyes widened. Nadia, please, the company is my life too. You should have thought of that before, Nadia replied coldly. Goodbye, Claudia. Nadia watched as Claudia left, feeling a mixture of sorrow and resolve. The revelations had been devastating, but she knew she needed to remove the toxic influences from her life to move forward. Nadia stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the neckline of her black silk gown. Her reflection stared back, a vision of perfection, bold, elegant, and in total control. Tonight, she wasn't just attending the city's biggest gala. She was reclaiming her power. Dean's betrayal had stung, but learning about Claudia, the woman she'd trusted implicitly, made her blood boil. Yet, tonight wasn't about messy confrontations in private. Tonight, they would get what they deserved, publicly, and with precision. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. Another text from Dean. Dean, 7:30 p.m. Nadia, please, we need to talk. You don't know the full story. I know I screwed up. But you have to understand, it wasn't just me. Nadia locked the phone without even reading the rest. There was nothing he could say that would change what was about to happen. Tonight, she wasn't going to just talk. She was going to act. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel was a glittering sea of New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the opulent space, reflecting off gold-trimmed mirrors and the polished marble floor. Nadia moved through the crowd with effortless grace, her emerald silk gown hugging her figure and her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon. Tonight was the annual T-Witness Gala, a night to celebrate the company's success and honor its most influential contributors. But beneath her composed exterior, Nadia's mind was a whirlwind of calculated moves and simmering emotions. She had spent weeks meticulously planning this evening, ensuring every detail was perfect. This wasn't just a gala. It was the stage for her carefully orchestrated revelation. She caught sight of Dean across the room, his charismatic smile captivating a group of investors. He looked every bit the successful entrepreneur in his tailored tuxedo, a whiskey glass dangling casually from his fingers. Claudia stood nearby, effortlessly chic in a sleek black dress, laughing at something one of the guests had said. They appeared oblivious to the storm about to descend upon them. Nadia's heart tightened as she recalled the painful moments of discovery, the whispered conversations, the late-night meetings, the lingering glances between Dean and Claudia that she had initially dismissed as harmless, but now she knew better. Their betrayal ran deep, and tonight, the facade would crumble. Everything is set, Dorian whispered as he approached her side, his eyes scanning the room. Good, Nadia replied softly, her gaze steady on Dean and Claudia. And the media. In position, he confirmed. They think they're here for the charity announcements. A small smile tugged at the corners of Nadia's lips. Perfect. As the evening progressed, Nadia mingled with guests, her laughter genuine yet tinged with anticipation. She exchanged pleasantries with politicians, artists, and business moguls, all while keeping an eye on the clock. Finally, the moment arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced from the stage, his voice commanding attention. Please take your seats for a special presentation by our very own Nadia Sunrise. Applause rippled through the crowd as Nadia ascended the stage, her heels clicking confidently against the polished wood. She stood at the podium, her poise commanding the room. The murmurs of admiration were almost tangible. All eyes were on her. Good evening, esteemed guests, colleagues, and friends, she began, her voice steady and clear. Tonight, we celebrate the incredible achievements of T-Witness and the people who have made it possible. But beyond our success, it's important to recognize the values that underpin everything we do: trust, integrity, and transparency. She paused, letting her words sink in, her gaze sweeping over the audience until they landed on Dean and Claudia. They exchanged puzzled glances but remained unaware of what was unfolding. "In the spirit of transparency," Nadia continued, her eyes never leaving theirs, "I'd like to share a project we've been working on. A behind-the-scenes look at the people who drive our company forward." The lights dimmed as a large screen descended behind her. A soft melody played as a video began, showcasing candid moments of the T-Witness team at work, brainstorming sessions, charity events, moments of triumph and camaraderie. The audience watched with smiles and occasional murmurs of appreciation. But then the tone shifted. The music faded into a somber note as the footage transitioned to grainy security camera clips. Dean entering Nadia's penthouse late at night, looking over his shoulder before slipping inside. Moments later, Claudia appeared on screen, following the same path. The timestamp in the corner showed the late hour, the overlapping visits. A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. Whispered questions began to surface. "Is that Dean? Wait, isn't that Claudia? What is this?" The next clip showed them in an intimate embrace in the office hallway, their faces partially obscured but unmistakable. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Eyes darted between the screen and the real-life counterparts sitting among them. Dean's face drained of color as he stared at the screen, his confident demeanor crumbling. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around as the weight of the room's gaze settled on him. Claudia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She sank lower in her chair as if wishing she could disappear. The video continued relentlessly, displaying text messages projected onto the screen, plans to meet in secret, derogatory comments about Nadia, discussions about leveraging company assets for personal gain. Each message appeared with a resounding thud, like nails in a coffin. The audience erupted into a cacophony of reactions. "I can't believe this. How could they? This is unbelievable." Voices overlapped, some filled with shock, others with indignation. Prominent figures whispered fiercely among themselves, their eyes never leaving Dean and Claudia. "Turn it off!" Dean shouted, leaping to his feet, his voice cracked with desperation. He pushed through the crowd toward the stage, but security personnel discreetly intercepted him, stepping in front of him with firm resolve. "Sir, please return to your seat," one of them said calmly. "Get out of my way," Dean snarled, but his protest only drew more attention. Camera flashes sparked as media personnel captured every moment, their lenses zeroing in on the unfolding scandal. Claudia remained frozen in her seat, tears welling in her eyes. She looked around frantically, meeting the judgmental stares of her peers. Whispers seemed to swell into roars in her ears. "Claudia, is this true? I never expected this from her. She's finished." Nadia stepped forward on the stage, reclaiming the audience's attention. The room gradually quieted, though an undercurrent of tension remained palpable. "Betrayal is a painful truth to confront," she said, her voice carrying a blend of sorrow and resolve. "But it's necessary for growth and integrity. Tonight I choose to confront it openly." She took a steadying breath, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Effective immediately, Dean Pardo and Claudia Angelista are relieved of their duties at T-Witness. Their actions have not only violated my personal trust, but have also compromised the ethical standards we uphold as a company. A stunned silence followed her declaration. Then, one by one, people began to clap, hesitant at first, then building into a supportive ovation. The sound swelled, filling the ballroom. Nadia felt a surge of empowerment, the solidarity of her colleagues and friends bolstering her. As she descended the stage, guests approached her with words of encouragement and admiration. "You're incredibly brave, Nadia. We stand with you. Let us know if there's anything we can do." She graciously thanked them, her composure unwavering. Yet, beneath the surface, a whirlwind of emotions churned. Relief, a sorrow, anger, and a bittersweet sense of closure. Meanwhile, Dean struggled against the security guard's restraint. "Nadia, please," he shouted, desperation etched across his face. "This isn't the place for this. We can talk." "Just you and me." His pleas fell on deaf ears. The crowd parted around him as if he carried a contagious disease. Former allies avoided his gaze, distancing themselves physically and socially. "Unbelievable," someone muttered as they passed by him. "How the mighty fall," another remarked with a shake of their head. Claudia, still seated, seemed paralyzed. She clutched her clutch purse tightly, knuckles white, as she attempted to stand. Her legs wobbled. No one offered a hand. Instead, she was met with cold stares and whispered condemnations. "Nadia," Claudia called out weakly, her voice barely audible over the din. "Please, let me explain." Nadia turned to face her, eyes steely. "There's nothing left to say, Claudia. Trust once broken cannot be mended with words." Claudia's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was—" "Spare me," Nadia interrupted sharply. "You made your choices. Now you must face the consequences." Security personnel approached Claudia, gesturing politely. "Ma'am, we'll escort you out." She glanced around, realizing that the supportive network she once had was gone. Colleagues averted their eyes. Some shook their heads in disappointment. As Dean and Claudia were led toward the exit, the media swarmed. Microphones and cameras were thrust toward them. "Dean, do you have any comment on the allegations?" "Claudia, how long has this been going on? Do you feel any remorse for betraying Nadia Sunrise?" Their attempts to shield their faces were futile. The flashes were blinding, the questions relentless. Outside the ballroom, the cool night air hit them like a slap. The reality of their situation sank in. Careers destroyed, reputations shattered, relationships severed. Nadia watched from a distance inside the venue, her expression unreadable. Dorian joined her side, offering a reassuring nod. "You did the right thing," he said softly. She sighed, the weight of the evening settling upon her shoulders. "It had to be done." He placed a supportive hand on her back. "They left you no choice." Guests began to disperse, but not without casting lingering glances toward Nadia. Some filled with admiration, others with sympathy. The whispers continued, but now they carried a tone of respect for Nadia's strength. "She's incredible. I wouldn't have had the courage. This will only make her stronger." Over the following days, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. News outlets buzzed with the story. Headlines splashed with images of Dean and Claudia's public disgrace. Scandal rocks T-Witness Gala. Power couple's betrayal exposed by Nadia Sunrise. Claudia Angelista and Dean Pardo, rise and fall. Business associates severed ties with Dean and Claudia. Invitations were rescinded, meetings canceled. Their names became synonymous with deceit. In contrast, Nadia's reputation soared. Articles praised her courage and leadership, highlighting her commitment to ethical standards. T-Witness's stock remained stable, bolstered by public support and confidence in Nadia's vision. Dean and Claudia faced professional exile. They attempted to salvage their careers. Dean reached out to contacts, but calls went unanswered. Claudia tried to secure meetings with investors, but doors were firmly closed. One afternoon, as Nadia sat in her office overlooking the skyline, her new assistant, Bitsy, entered hesitantly. "There's someone here to see you," she said with fear. "It's Dean." Nadia considered for a moment before shaking her head. "Tell him that our business is concluded. There's nothing more to discuss." The assistant nodded and left to relay the message. She turned her gaze back to the cityscape, the sun casting a warm glow over the skyscrapers. The path ahead was uncertain, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced betrayal head-on and emerged stronger, her integrity intact. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dorian. "Dorian, 2:15 p.m. Proud of you, sis. Dinner tonight?" A small smile touched her lips as she replied. "Nadia, 2:16 p.m. Wouldn't miss it. See you at 9. She set the phone down. a feeling of contentment settling over her. The chapters of betrayal and hurt were closing, making way for new beginnings. Nadia rose from her chair, her reflection in the window mirroring a woman who had weathered the storm and found her strength. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever came next. Living well wasn't just the best revenge, it was the only revenge. Can you believe all of that actually happened? It's amazing how reality can be even more dramatic than fiction. Nadia's journey is a powerful reminder of strength and empowerment in the face of betrayal. I'm so glad you stayed with me until the end, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Were you surprised by how she handled the situation? Do you think her actions were justified? Leave a comment below, and let's get a conversation going. Your insights always add so much depth to these stories. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who love exploring these compelling true stories. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Will I Be Happy so you never miss out on new content that delves into real-life twists and turns. Thanks for watching, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay happy.